The idea that Ten Hag can actually say that the clubs around him spent enormous amounts of money when Manchester United, spent nearly £250 million is almost preposterous.
This is One-to-One with Simon Jordan. Don't forget, of course, to keep liking and subscribing. Keep sending the brilliant questions into the comment section below. And let's get on with the last show, not the last show of our run, but the last show of the Premier League season. Tottenham Hotspur obviously has some challenges, some very clear challenges in the minds of their fans, ultimately their owner, Daniel Levy and Joe Lewis, and of course, more importantly, of course, the media, with a requirement for a sporting director, obviously, the first team manager, and the ever-decreasing circle is Harry Kane's contract. But they brought in the chief football officer, Scott Munn, who comes with a decent reputation, who will obviously be advising Daniel on recruitment, and I suspect one of those recruitment scenarios may well be the manager. Hence the reasons why, given the fact he's an Australian, there's a heavy link to Ange Postecoglou at Celtic. I'm not in the camp that there should be a race to the bottom. If you're struggling to find the right manager and the timing of it, given Conte's, I think, disgraceful exit, then you might as well take your time. And whether Tottenham fans like this or not, you have to have a degree of admiration for the fact that Daniel Levy won't just race into an appointment. Also, given the situations around Mourinho and Conte and, of course, Nuno Espirito Santo, it becomes even more important that Daniel gets his appointment right, because if he doesn't, he's going to find himself in the range of in the way of even more vitriol. So I don't think it's a catastrophe taking your time. I think it's a disappointing season, and obviously Tottenham fans are not happy with Daniel Levy, with the investment in the club, with the team's performance, with the style of play. The style of play's got nothing to do with Levy. It has to do with people like Conte and Mourinho and obviously Nuno Espirito Santo, but the appointment itself, of course, is Daniel's responsibility. So I think it's not about how quickly you make the appointment. I think it's how right you get it. Now, Arne Slot was indexed. People had never even heard of him, I suspect, until he was indexed to Tottenham. And then, of course, the fact Tottenham don't get him is an outrage. In that instance, I think the manager probably leveraged the opportunity to get a better deal out of Finehood. Look, I can't say of all certainty that I'd put my house on the fact that Daniel will get the right manager in place. But the fact that he doesn't want to race to it or isn't able to identify the right person at this moment in time shouldn't be a telling sign for whether they will or they won't. Look, if they haven't got a manager in by August, start screaming, but I suspect they'll get a manager in. They'll get a manager that can do better than the previous ones, that possibly can work better with Daniel, and Tottenham fans will say, yeah, work with the fact that he accepts that he won't get what he wants. Well, I'm not sure that's right, but we'll see. The Harry Kane situation, there's pros and cons. No one would begrudge Harry Kane the opportunity to leave for another football club. At this moment in time, there are no offers on the table, so there's nothing to consider. So it becomes a situation as to whether he stays with his contract and Tottenham let him go for free, or Tottenham put him on a new contract. I have a feeling he might stay, but at this moment in time, until someone makes an offer for Harry, it's a difficult one to call as to what Tottenham will do. If someone comes in and said, we'll give you 25 million for Harry Kane, Tottenham might as well keep him. Get him to stay with them, get them into the Champions League next season if that's what they're trying to achieve, and they'll earn more than 25 million quid. If someone comes in and offers 90 million quid for a 30-year-old Harry Kane with 1 year left on his contract, that'll be a different discussion. Either which way, I think Daniel would like to keep him. I think there's certain members of Harry Kane's family that would like him to stay at Tottenham. But of course that will also, albeit I still think it's a lunatics running the asylum, it'll also be who comes in to manage the side that might help in the thinking. I'm moderately confident that Tottenham will get it right without putting my, nailing my colours to the mast in terms of backing Daniel, because everyone thinks I'm a Daniel Levy acolyte. I'm just balanced. I think when you blame somebody, you should also praise them for the things they've done well in the past. And if you're going to blame somebody, you should blame everybody en masse rather than individual players. Chairman, managers should all be in the cart. But I don't think it's going to be a disaster. I think they're going to find their way through it. And that's just me being perhaps overly optimistic. And all those Daniel Levy haters that think that I'm a Daniel Levy acolyte will have plenty of opportunity to say it's only because you like Daniel. But I've got a sneaking suspicion that Tottenham will be a lot better for the beginning of next season than they were at the end of this one. The way the league is structured at this moment in time, the way teams are performing in it, I can't see anybody challenging Manchester City next season, besides perhaps Manchester City themselves.
Haaland will get better. If he gets injured, that takes Haaland out of the equation, but no one's wishing injury on anybody. De Bruyne eventually will run out of gas, but I don't think it will be next year. Pep Guardiola, depending upon how they do in the next two immediate finals, the FA Cup and the Champions League, will have this unique achievement with 2 years to go, which he perhaps will try and repeat, because that's the nature of greatness in terms of people really being focused on doing their job to the highest levels. I'm not sure. I think Liverpool will be much better. I think United will keep on evolving under Ten Hag. I think we'll see Chelsea back in the mix with Pochettino. But are any of them, and Arsenal, if they back the manager and give him far more resources than he's currently got, because they're going to need to, I think, to stay where they are inside the top four, let alone win the league, I think all of those will play a factor in the Premier League next year. But if Man City want to be as good as they are this year, then I don't see anybody raising the bar to such a level that they put Man City in a position where someone takes over the Premier League. I hope that's not the case. Not because I have any real downer on Man City winning the league, but I don't want a Bayern Munich situation, albeit the Munich situation on the weekend was fascinating with Dortmund handing the title back to them. But I don't want a dominance of a league by one side, because I don't think it helps the product. But I can't see at this moment in time, unless we see a massive change in the personnel inside clubs like Liverpool, that they're going to be able to get to where Man City are, unless, of course, we see a drop-off. And we haven't seen one. Even when they've lost the league, Man City, they've still been remarkable. So for the purpose of this conversation, people are going to have to really put their boots on, write their checks out, to give Man City a run for the money next season. Well, exactly. The idea that Ten Hag can actually say that the clubs around him spent enormous amounts of money when Manchester United, spent nearly £250 million is almost preposterous. I think it might just be a calling card to ensure that he's backed appropriately in the August and July transfer windows of this year, so that he's able to continue to move forward, because it's clear that they need more resource, they need a bigger and better squad. They need someone alongside Rashford to take some of the weight off the goal-scoring requirements. So I can't, in all seriousness, take it seriously that someone said that. I think he's probably referring to Chelsea and the £600 million that they've spent, which nobody should want to emulate, really. And there has to be a cut-off point, and I don't understand how these guys think they can just say whatever they want. It might well be the reference point to needing a centre forward in January and getting Weghorst on a loan deal rather than signing somebody, but very rarely does anybody do good business in January. So I think Ten Hag's getting carried away with himself at the end of the season. But to some extent, he merits pushing the envelope. And I suspect it's nothing more than really just a demarcation point saying we need to do the same again this summer. Because if anyone's advocating for £300 or £400 million spends every year, then they're unrealistic. If that's what he's expecting, to go above 250 million to 300 to 350, just because Chelsea's horror show of profligacy seems to be now something people are looking at and saying, well, if they can spend 600 million, then why couldn't we, and why shouldn't we? Because you shouldn't want to have to spend that kind of money. There shouldn't be a necessity to do it, and it shouldn't be something that's encouraged, because it creates such difficulty in the landscape of football, this constant spend and salary increases, that in the end will bring problems to the landscape, especially when you've got new regulations coming in which are changing the wage structure. I don't think it's anything more than that. I read this quote myself and thought, you saucy sod. But listen, managers push the envelope, and that's what he's probably doing. Who's in contention worst owner of the season? It depends what you measure it by. I mean, if you're measuring it by bad decisions and agendas that aren't for the best for the football club, then you're probably looking at Leeds, because you've got an owner that apparently said at the beginning of the season, laughingly to a group of fans, that there was no danger of relegation. It was a ridiculous observation. It was impossible, I think the quote attributed to Rabazzini was. And here they are, having stayed with a manager that should have been gotten rid of in Jesse Marsh, having tried to pin a tail on the donkey by finding a manager and landing with Javi Gracia, who I think is not a bad manager, but was the wrong manager for Leeds in terms of the group of players that he tried to change from a certain style of play into another, and they weren't capable of doing it, to appointing Sam Allardyce with 4 games to go. Sam Allardyce, whose last outing was to get West Bromwich Albion relegated. If you're going to employ Sam and pay him significant amounts of money and give him whacking great big bonuses that are so unpalatable to stay up, then you need to at least give him 6 to 8 games, not 4, of which 2 of them are against Man City and Newcastle, to give yourself the chance. And of course, you've got a boardroom mess between one part of the ownership that gets to take over if they stay in the Premier League, and one part of the ownership that gets to go, and rumours going around that one part of the ownership wanted to sell players whilst the other didn't. So it's a shocking waste, because Leeds United have taken 17 years or 16 years to get back to the Premier League and gone out in 3 after having 2 relegation battles, one they got away with last season and one they've suffered for. So I think it would probably go to Leeds. People will make the case for Daniel, and the fact that the absolute mess that was made of the situation with Conte, I think was predominantly Conte not wanting to stay there anymore because things have changed in his life. And like so many people in the football world, rather than leave people wanting more, they leave people wanting less, because rather than finish the job and go, right, my contract expires in the summer, I don't want to be here anymore, but I'm going to go out and do it properly. Football people tend to go, I don't like it, I'm going to throw my toys out the pram. So I think you could look at it from that point of view. People would look at the Leicester situation. It's very difficult to criticise that circumstances because of the tragedy in the ownership of that football club. But I do think once you become disengaged in the boardroom, and I don't just mean economically, but fundamentally that comes to pass, then you can find yourself having a disengaged manager and disengaged group of players, hence the reasons why Leicester find themselves in a situation. And of course you can make a case for Southampton, because you've got a new owner that's come in here, bought a football club and presided over a disaster. I mean, Hassan Hootel probably had run his course, but Nathan Jones was a disaster. Ruben Sellers was a very good, for the camera, platitude merchant, but had very little substance behind it. And a group of players that they spent a lot of money on, more than Southampton have ever really spent, that had no balance and sense behind it in terms of too many young players coming in. So you can pick, as I, pull these ownership models to pieces for the purpose of this question, you can pick yourselves. But I would think it's probably the Ass of the Year award probably goes to Leeds United, not to their supporters, who are a remarkable set of supporters that have the most feral atmosphere at Ellen Road, because I've been there with teams that I owned and it was such an intimidating place, but because a club that had such potential, that was possibly everybody's second favourite team when they came up, has allowed itself to drift back into the Championship. They never exercised the Bielsa spirit. He had run his course, Bielsa, but they needed to replace him with someone that took them on. And they didn't. They listened to American ownership that thought that RB models in Austria and Germany meant that Jesse Marsch was the right solution, and he wasn't. And everything sort of grew from that poisonous tree. So, Leeds. Right, that's it for this week's edition of 1-to-1 with Simon Jordan. Let me know your views on Spurs and their recruitment policies coming forward with managers, Man City and who's going to challenge them, and the ridiculous assertions from Ten Hag that they haven't spent enough money last year when they spent 250 million quid. Don't forget to keep liking and subscribing. Of course, leaving the questions in the comment section below, and I'll see you next time out.